You're listening to Signal Lost, original alien fiction. New story every week. I'm glad you found the frequency.
I have spent my career studying things that cannot speak for themselves. Pressure gradients, thermal layers, the slow, indifferent chemistry of seawater at depth. I have published 31 papers in peer-reviewed journals. I have logged over 4,000 hours underwater. I am not a person given to imagination or exaggeration, and I say that not as a boast, but as context, because what I am about to tell you will sound, to most people, like exactly those things. My name is Dr. Lena Park. I am a marine biologist, formerly of the Coastal Research Institute at Port Haddon. I say formerly because I resigned my position 8 months ago, and I have not been back in the water since. I want to be precise about what I remember and what I do not. Precision matters. It is the only tool I have left that still feels reliable. What I remember is this. I went under at 9:14 a.m. on the 14th of November at grid reference 44 North, approximately 12 nautical miles off the coast. I remember checking my equipment. I remember the water closing over my head. I remember the first 40 minutes of the dive clearly and completely. After that, nothing. What I remember next is surfacing, the cold shock of open air, the sky above me, low and gray, and the water around me, flat, empty, and completely, impossibly silent. The boat was gone. My crew was gone. And 6 hours and 8 minutes of my life had simply ceased to exist. I should explain what we were doing out there. For 3 years, our team had been monitoring a series of anomalous sonar readings at grid 44 North. The readings were irregular, not consistent enough to be geological, not structured enough to be man-made. They appeared without pattern, sometimes months apart, sometimes 3 nights running. They were not loud enough to be seismic. They were not shaped correctly to be biological. My colleague, Dr. Ferris, who had first flagged them 2 years earlier, had taken to calling them the knocking, because that, he said, was the closest approximation. Something, at depth, periodically knocking. Not against anything, just knocking, the way you might knock on a door when you are not sure anyone is home. I had never entirely shared his poetic interpretation of the data. I preferred to think of them as an unclassified acoustic phenomenon, interesting, worth investigating, but likely explainable once we had better instruments deployed at closer range. That was why I was diving that morning. We had placed a series of hydrophone arrays at depth the previous week, and I was descending to check the calibration on the deepest unit, approximately 230 feet down, at the edge of a shelf where the seabed dropped away into a trench we had not yet fully mapped. The conditions were good, current minimal, visibility, when I entered the water, around 60 feet. Nothing about the morning felt unusual. I want to be clear about that. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt like a warning. It just felt like a Tuesday. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary silence of depth. I was familiar with that. The muffled compression of sound as you descend, the way the world above gradually becomes theoretical. This was something different. This was a silence with a quality to it. An active silence, if that makes any sense. The kind that makes you aware that something that was there before has stopped. I descended to 80 feet and checked my instruments. Normal. Descended to 120. Normal. The water was colder than I had expected, not dramatically so, but enough that I noted it. A thermal anomaly. Possibly a cold upwelling from the trench, possibly something else. At 170 feet, the visibility changed. The water below me, and I want to be very precise here, became luminous. Not bright, not blinding. A faint, sourceless luminescence, blue-gray, the color of early morning light through frosted glass. It came from below, from the direction of the shelf edge. It did not flicker. It did not pulse. It was simply present, the way bioluminescence sometimes is, except that nothing I know of produces bioluminescence in that quantity, at that depth, in water that cold, in that color. I descended toward it. I know how that sounds. A scientist alone, descending toward an unidentified light source at depth without signaling her crew. I have asked myself many times since why I did not stop. Why I did not ascend, report what I was seeing, wait for backup. I do not have a satisfying answer. I was not frightened. I was not hypnotized or compelled in any dramatic sense. I simply wanted to see. The curiosity was as clean and uncomplicated as anything I have ever felt, so I kept descending. I reached the shelf at 210 feet. The hydrophone array was there, mounted to the rock, exactly as we had placed it. Lights green, functioning normally. I checked the calibration, made my notes, and turned to look out over the edge of the shelf into the trench below. The light was coming from down there, not from the walls of the trench, not from the floor, which was too deep to see, from somewhere in the middle of the water column, suspended, sourceless, enormous. I have tried many times to calculate the scale of what I was looking at, based on the light's apparent size at that distance. My best estimate, which I acknowledge is imprecise, is that the light source, or the object producing it, was somewhere between 300 and 600 feet across. It was not moving. It was simply there, in the dark water below me, at depth no light should exist, glowing with a calm and patient luminescence that made me think, and I include this detail only because it is what I actually thought in that moment, of something waiting. I do not know how long I looked at it. I know that at some point it began to move. And then I was on the surface. That is the entirety of what I can tell you about the 6 hours and 8 minutes between those two moments. There is no fragmentary memory, no dreamlike impression, no sense of time having passed at all. One moment, I was at 210 feet, watching something rise toward me from below. The next, I was on the surface, cold, disoriented, and alone. The boat was not there. I turned 360 degrees in the water. The surface was flat for as far as I could see in every direction. No vessel, no debris, no sound of an engine. The sky above me was the low gray of late afternoon, 4, maybe 5 o'clock. When I had entered the water, it had been mid-morning. I activated my emergency beacon immediately and went into survival protocol. Controlled breathing, minimal movement, preserve heat. The water temperature was manageable, cold but not immediately dangerous in my dry suit. I estimated I could survive for several hours if necessary. I want to tell you that I was calm, professionally, mechanically calm, the way training kicks in and makes the body do the right things while the mind is still catching up. That part is true. What is also true is that the calm felt wrong. It felt administered, like something had reached into the part of me that should have been screaming and turned the volume down to a level it found more appropriate. I did not like that feeling at all. The Coast Guard found me at 6:47 p.m., 2 hours and 25 minutes in the water. They had been searching since 1:15 p.m. when our research vessel, the Meridian Star, had been found drifting without crew approximately 4 nautical miles from my entry point. All 3 members of my dive support team were gone. No sign of struggle, no distress signal sent. The vessel's systems were functioning normally. The only anomaly the Coast Guard noted was that every clock on board, electronic and analog, had stopped at 9:14 a.m., the exact time I had entered the water. My crew was never found. I was taken to hospital, treated for mild hypothermia, and held for observation for 2 days. I told the Coast Guard investigator what I remembered. I told him about the light, about the silence, about the gap. He wrote everything down and looked at me the way people look at you when they are deciding whether you are credible. I found out later that he filed my account under psychological trauma secondary to near drowning. He was not wrong that I was traumatized. He was wrong about what had traumatized me. 3 things happened in the weeks after. The first, the hydrophone array data from Grid 44 North, which should have been recording continuously, showed 6 hours and 8 minutes of complete silence. Not equipment failure, not corrupted data. A recording of genuine silence, as if the ocean itself had gone quiet. The second, I found the mark. On my collarbone, left side. I had not noticed it in the hospital. Small, precise, like a minor burn. Geometric. 3 lines converging to a single point. I have no memory of acquiring it. It has not faded. The third, a letter. No stamp, no postmark, slipped through my door sometime in the night. Inside, 1 piece of paper, 1 number, written in plain black ink, 1033.7. I have not been back in the water. But sometimes I stand at the edge of the harbor and look out at the flat gray surface, and I think about the silence with a quality to it. And I think about something patient and enormous and luminous suspended in the dark below. And I think it was not waiting for me specifically. It was just waiting, and I happened to come down. My name is Dr. Lena Park. I study things that cannot speak for themselves. The ocean remembers everything that has ever moved through it, every pressure wave, every temperature change, every object that has displaced its water. I think about that a lot now. I think about what the water at Grid 44 North recorded that day, what impression was left in it, what the trench below that shelf has been measuring and storing and remembering for longer than we have had instruments to ask it questions. I think the knocking was not a question. I think it was an announcement. And I think whoever, whatever, was making it got tired of waiting for an answer. My name is Dr. Lena Park, and this was my signal.
Signal lost. New story every week. Have you heard the frequency?